Thank you for joining us for Effective Heart Change, the podcast that will discuss how to apply faith principles to real-life situations. This is Effective Heart Change. And now, your co-host, Matthew.
This is our first episode of the brand new podcast. I'm Matthew. I'm a married father of 5, and I'm here because I am passionate about truth and about biblical principles being applied in real life. I'm excited because today I get to introduce to you David A. Case. David is the founder and director of Live Free Ministries and the Omega Project. The Omega Project is a drug and alcohol recovery program located here in McPherson, Kansas. David has been a pastor for over 30 years. He is also a husband, a father, and a grandfather. And on top of that, the most important thing, he is a devoted follower of Christ. David, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here today.
The first question that we have is, why have you decided to call the podcast Effective Heart Change?
Effective heart change to me is it's a powerful concept. A lot of people are followers of God, but they wake up and they go through the same kinds of traumas day after day, struggles here, struggles there, and it really doesn't change things. I think the best example I can use are the people that I run into who just say, "Oh, I pray all the time, everywhere, all kinds of ways," and yet their lives are a total mess. I mean, it's just like, if that's what prayer is, I'm not sure I want to do prayer. Right? I think I want to keep a distance from prayer. A lot of times Christianity is that way. People are, wow, I'm walking with God, etc., and you don't see the growth, you don't see the improvement, and so their lives just kind of continue to be a shambles. So when I talk about effective heart change, I believe life is lived from the inside out. What's going on in the deeper places inside of you, it's going to create a future. It's going to impact the people around you. So that's your heart. So we want effective heart change. I could call it effective heart growth, but we chose change instead.
Doesn't sound quite as snappy.
Yeah, it just doesn't quite roll off the tongue in the same way. So effective heart change, we want to see people getting better, growing, becoming more like Christ, changing into His image in a way that it's impacting the people around them and changing lives.
Now, some people, when they hear effective heart change, they might think that it's a little hooky. How do you practically change someone's heart when most people don't even understand the definition of heart?
One of the lines that I use is heart change comes out of heart choice. There's got to be that deeper level choosing. Now, what does that deeper level look like? First of all, let's bring back in the spiritual. As a culture, in fact, for almost hundreds of years, we've pushed back on the idea of spiritual, and everything's mental. Everything's choice. Everything's will. Well, I believe there's a deeper layer, that heart level, that spiritual level that's kind of invisible, subconscious. You can be aware of it if you pull it up to a level of awareness, but much of the time you're not aware of it. And so you might have things operating in the background. So if you can begin to wake up to those things operating in the background and get those things changed, it's really powerful in terms of life transformation.
Okay, so is the goal of effective heart change then to help expose or show people how to expose those undercurrents that are going on and then actually give them a way to change it? Or do you just kind of show them what's happening and then leave them to figure it out? How does that work?
There's specific steps that you take, depending on what you are dealing with. It's like every different issue has a different solution, and that's why it's called effective heart change. Many times, let's talk drugs and alcohol. Many times people come to us and I say, okay, what's the driver? And they usually kind of look at me and I say, all right, what is it that takes you into your addiction? What's your trigger? What causes you to go there? And many times, people who have even been through treatment many different times, they can't even give me an answer. They're like, well, I don't know. So you don't know why you use. You don't know what causes you to use. And many times the answer is no. We help them begin to line that up in a way where, oh, okay, this is what causes you to use. If this is what causes you to use, then these are the steps to solution that you need. A lot of times programs are what I call one size fits all. So they give you a set curriculum and they hope that somewhere during that curriculum, you find your solution and you apply your solution. We try to be much more targeted, where we help people identify, all right, this is who you are. This is what you struggle with. This is what it will take for you to get better.
So I'm a firm believer in the way that I've always heard it is that when somebody is acting out in those addictive ways or in sinful ways, that they're trying to fill a void that the Lord is supposed to be filling. But it seems like church or religion or people in general that are trying to be helpful, they end there. Well, you're trying to fill a void. So you're not only identifying what the void is, because you're always pointing to the Lord, but you're actually identifying the physical causes or psychological causes or
spiritual causes.
Okay. And then actually giving them a way to deal with those issues. So do you have a type of therapy that you use, or how does that actually work?
Let me start with something totally different. I know you're not asking that, but hey, I'm going to go there. I have that right?
Yes, you do.
Let's just start here. I use the example of addiction, but let's back that thing up, because almost everybody I know, they have areas of their life that they'd like to be able to change. They'd like to overcome. They'd like to get a breakthrough. That's the first thing. When I'm talking about heart level, this is not just for addicts. Yes, I threw out that as an example, but every one of us have areas where we need to grow. We need to become more like Christ. We need to get healthier. Choose whatever language you want to use. So those things are fighting against you. So what do? We help identify those underlying things. And let me just talk about spiritual stuff for a little bit. And people don't think of what I'm getting ready to say as spiritual, but it has a spiritual dynamic. And that's bitterness. And that's the first one that I always go to, because people get bitterness. They understand. Bitterness has a strong emotional piece. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about bitterness, you think of the emotional piece, but it also has an intellectual piece. As soon as I enter into bitterness, what happens? My emotions are flared up in a certain way. My thoughts begin to flare up in a certain way. I begin to think. I begin to go through and reevaluate things that have happened between me and that person, and it's like a negative cast gets put over your thinking. And then next thing you know, I'm probably going to speak and I'm going to act in ways that line up with that bitterness. Well, my belief system is that there is a deeper level called that spiritual level. And when you're able to deal with that deeper spiritual level, the thoughts change much more easily. The emotions change much more easily. It's not that there's not a thought level to deal with or an emotion level to deal with, but when I'm able to take it to a God connection level, to where I'm interacting with God, I'm getting stuff handed off to God, it's amazing the power that gives us to begin to deal with things in the natural realm or real life or whatever you want to call it.
So it's a concrete way to connect spiritual reality with the earthly reality that's easier to see.
Let me start here. You have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. It's three in one. And the Bible talks about the triune God and the unified God. And we are three parts. We are spirit, soul, and body. Just as God the Father operates as one, God has designed us to operate as one. So you can't really even separate it. It's all tied together. If I'm not dealing with the spiritual, I'm trying to start at this emotional level and get this emotional level fixed. It wouldn't be any different than if I start at this emotional level and I'm not going to deal with the thought level, or I'm not going to deal with the choice level. We as human beings are a unified whole, and when there's divisions in there, it's just not healthy, and it's not working the way God has designed it to work. So then back to effective heart change, I mean, it's like I'm pushing a boulder up the hill at that point in order to try to get change. And that's just, it's difficult to do. When you begin working with the design that God has for us, it's just so much easier.
Switching topics, What is your ultimate goal with Effective Heart Change, the podcast?
For years, I've been doing these studies, and I've taken the last 14 years now. We started the drug alcohol program to understand and make sure that I'm doing practical application. I'm able to speak to different people at different levels in very effective ways. Well, when you learn that, I guess I would say I have a sense of responsibility almost. It's like I've got these things. I've got people showing up the program going, this needs to go somewhere. I mean, people need to hear this. They need to understand this. And when I go out and I speak, I get the same kinds of responses. It's like, wow, this is good stuff. And so a podcast like this gives it the opportunity to go out just in a different dimension than where we've been.
Well, I know for me personally, started attending some prayer meetings years back, and those prayer meetings changed my life, not just because of the prayer. I was a firm believer in the Lord and had been trying to do things correctly and just couldn't seem to make things fit. And then when I started coming to the prayer meetings and being exposed to some of the teaching you were doing, I realized all of this is lining up with the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
It's all making sense. And now I have a way to actually put it into practice. And in a very short amount of time, I was able to stop and get out of most of my addictive behaviors and was able to almost have a fog lifted and be able to see the world a little bit clearer. And then the Lord started working, and I could actually see that the Lord was working and knew how to cooperate with him and follow what he was asking me to do. Whereas before it was a nope, no, no. And then now it was, oh, wait, I see what you're doing. And I could actually walk through that. And so that's part of the reason I'm passionate about this podcast is it works. I've been there, done that, and it actually worked. That doesn't happen with a lot of programs. How does Effective Heart Change differ from the countless other self-help and religious podcasts that are out there today?
Well, let me just start with the word self-help. I believe that God has designed us to walk in partnership with Him. If you go all the way back to the very beginning, God was there. I believe it was Jesus, but Jesus was there in the garden with Adam and Eve, and there was a fellowship and there was a connection. And then Adam, when he sinned, it said he went through spiritual death. And God said, in the day that you eat of this fruit, you will die. Well, he didn't physically die. He lived hundreds more years. So what happened? That connection was broken. When that connection was broken, what happened? Shame entered in. Excuses entered in. Blaming others entered in. The entire nature of Adam changed when that partnership, that fellowship, that sonship, just being a child of God, being a creature of God, when that fellowship was broken, everything changed. When we begin to restore that connection and we enter back into that walking with God, that partnership with God, that sonship, that daughtership with God, it really does change everything. And so many times what self-help programs are, they're actually trying to get you to behave better apart from God. And one of the things that I believe in very, very strongly, I start with the word trust. Trust is the vehicle by which you draw strength from God. Trust is the vehicle by which you draw strength from people. So when I begin to learn to walk in trust and I'm moving in that direction and I'm opening myself up and I start doing this connecting thing, then I can draw strength. Then I can overcome. That's a very different picture than me telling you, well, if you'll just change this behavior and this behavior. And most of the time what people say, I've tried.
Right.
Are you kidding me? You don't think that I know that I have those issues? Okay. So we know what the issues are. Let's chart a path here where you're connecting with God, you're connecting with godly people, you're drawing the strength that you need in order to get a different outcome.
David, what experience do you bring that enables your method to be successful?
I've had a variety of experiences. Actually, this will sound crazy, but I'll take it all the way back to the dairy farm. I learned to handle cows in a way where you approach them in different ways, you calm, etc. Some people, they get out the whip or whatever. I learned I could get to the point to where you could step out and next thing you know, they're calm around you and they're doing what you're supposed to do. And so just learning different skills like that, and then working with people, just getting to know people. I've taught school. I've been a principal. I've pastored for 30 years. We've started the addiction recovery program. I've counseled over and over and over again. So the real life experiences are just there in so many different settings. But probably the biggest thing that I think I bring is I've listened. I wasn't an addict. How in the world was I going to relate to addicts? I had to ask questions. I had to listen. I had to admit that I didn't understand what they were going through. And I had to listen at a deep enough level to where I could begin to relate and interact in a way that, at this point, people look at me and go, you have to have been an addict. How can you relate? How can you interact? So I think that's been one of the biggest things, is just to allow my spiritual sensitivity of people and situations and listening to God and crying out to God. All of that just comes together into something that's been very effective.
I don't want people to get the wrong idea here. We are obviously presenting a lot of information. I believe you are an expert in this area because you've been doing it for so long and you've seen positive results, but you're definitely not perfect and you've never claimed to be. So in the goal of sharing vulnerability with the listeners, what is something that you have consistently struggled with, since you've been running ministry or pastoring, that you're willing to share?
One of the things that I would say, I am an addict in this sense. I was actually sharing with my dad, and he kind of looked at me and goes, well, then I'm an addict too, in terms of workaholic. I mean, we've got tendencies in our generations on both sides that there's just an unhealthiness there. So in that area, I've definitely struggled and had to work through that. And so many different ways. One of the big ones that I talk about is in 2003, so many, many years ago. God spoke to me in a very clear term. He said, you have more faith in your ability to work than you do mine. And that's an area that's been a consistent thing for me, to where a lot of times a crisis comes and my brain starts racing and I'm out there trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to do what here in order to change this situation? And somewhere in there, I have to stop and say, wait a minute, you don't know what to do. You don't know how to do it until you've surrendered this thing to God and prayed and waited and listened to God. You don't know what to do. And so that first tendency of me just wanting to get up and race through and find that answer and be able to give answers and solutions, I have to stop that tendency and wait and listen. And it's amazing when I do that. It's amazing how much of the time, somewhere in the process, the answer just shows up.
I've been working for you now 2+ years. Volunteering or working here. And one thing that I've noticed consistently is God makes you wait until the last second. It seems like it's always an 11th hour thing. And it always seems like it doesn't matter where you're wanting to go. The Lord makes his will known. And what I respect about you immensely is that you do it even when it doesn't always make sense to our minds or to the worldly way of doing things. But it's interesting to me that one of your biggest struggles is working too much and that faith in self, and God always makes you keep waiting right until the very end, which ties into what we're going to be doing in our first official series, which is going to be titled Pathways. And can you just give us a brief description of what the listener can expect out of Pathways?
Let's take the traditional language of sin. A lot of times people are like, my sin area, or if you don't like that language, do weaknesses or strongholds or brokenness or whatever you want to say. I believe that you can literally look at a person's brokenness, their stronghold, their sin area. You can look at that and you can draw a line from that to the call of God in their life. And just to get it in a simple nutshell, the most significant part of you as a human being is what you care about deeply. And what you care about deeply, I call it a passion. That passion is who you are. It's who you were created to be. Generally, what happens then, where are you going to get hurt? You're going to get hurt in that place of deep passion, in that place that you care about at a very deep level. Woundedness enters in. Problems enter into where people criticize you in that area or whatever, and then you jump back into the human effort area where oh yeah, you're telling me I'm not good in my passion area, and so then we jump into the human effort at a level that begins to compound itself. It's like the baseball hitter that's trying to think too much and he's working really hard and he can't hit a ball to save himself at that point. And so we really begin to just blow it in that particular area. That's the exact area that we're created to be. So what sin is basically falling short of the glory of God, missing the mark of God. I'm over here just sputtering and trying so hard. And after a while, I get to the point where I don't even want to try anymore because everything I do just seems to blow up and et cetera. A lot of times it's pretty simple to define that passion area and then say, here's your passion area. Here's who God created you to be. Here's why your passion area is blowing up. And let's move it from that place of being destructive to a place where it's back where God wants you to be.
Pornography is a huge issue these days. So in your opinion, based on the things that you found and that you've been teaching through Pathways, what does the repeated problem of pornography point somebody to an area of passion?
Pornography, I'm going to go back to a little more generic and not specific. I go back to Genesis 1:26, where God has said that He created us in His image, and one of the things that He created us to do is to rule. So when you have this whole idea of ruling, none of us feel good about ourselves unless we're having influence over other people. Well, many times what's happening in the relationship area, it's breaking down. I feel like I have no influence. I have no power. The hormonal emotional rush that you get out of pornography tends to make people what? Feel powerful. So I'm struggling with my self-worth. I'm struggling with my significance. I'm struggling with my impact that I have on other people. When those things are happening, it makes me very, very vulnerable to the rush. It's very much like a drug addiction, to the rush that you get from pornography. So if I'm going to actually help that out, a lot of times people, they want to come up with a simple solution. There's not a simple solution because I have to deal with that worth area. I have to deal with my relationships and the influence I'm having on people and feeling like I'm a worthwhile person. If I don't get those pieces put back together, I'm going to have a terribly difficult time in the self-control area over here with pornography.
And I think that answer right there sums up as perfectly as I could come up with of why I'm behind this ministry so much and why I think this is important. Because you take something that the average person would look at and would say, well, you're dealing with a lust issue or you're dealing with, some kind of sick thing. And you immediately bring it to a value issue, a deep-rooted core issue that goes across all races, economic levels, everything doesn't matter, your background, and it's applicable to every single person. And it actually makes sense. And I think that's what we're lacking a lot of.
And the other piece there, if you heard the complexity, a lot of times we try to make it simple. We try to make it so simple, and it's like, go do this one thing and you'll be fixed. Many times you're dealing with multiple layers of stuff. And so when I'm talking about that spiritual realm and all of the different dynamics, if you got 5 layers of things, I'm not going to promise you we're going to deal with this one layer and it's all going to work. I'll talk to you about that layer, and okay, we got that one taken care of. You're one step closer. Now let's get started on the second layer. And many times people don't see that complexity. They keep it at a simplicity level, and they're told by people of faith, well, you prayed, so it's all good now. And then they're discouraged or they're angry at God because God didn't keep His promises.
And I definitely believe, and I know you do too, that the Lord can miraculously deliver us from something. We've seen it time and again when somebody prays and immediately they're no longer drinking after a lifetime of it. So that does happen, and I want to make sure that people listening know that God still does answer prayer in that way, but that's not mostly the way that He seems to do it. The way that you talk about it a lot is prayers get answered through people very often because God sends someone along to help. Would you agree with that, or do you have something differing?
Let's go back to the word heart change. I believe that the number one will of God, you have to understand God has priorities. The number one will of God is that you would look like Christ. He wants you transformed into the image of love. He wants you transformed into the image of patience, etc. If we have a lot of intercessory prayer, that intercessory prayer can come along and it can powerfully work in a person's life to where there seemingly is dramatic change. And if the presence of God is poured out, there also is seemingly an instantaneously a change in how the person looks, feels, acts, talks, etc. But that heart change still has to be chosen, and it has to be chosen over a period of time by the person. So that person gets kind of this dramatic leap forward. But what I see happening when there's quote unquote deliverance, somewhere along the line, that person has to embrace what God did in a moment and get that heart change. And if the heart change doesn't show up, what happens? The person falls back into the old lifestyle. So I absolutely believe in those quantum leaps. I absolutely believe in the power of God showing up and touching people and changing people. But I believe more, if you will, in heart change, because ultimately that's where the authority comes from. That's where people get better, stay better, have impact in other people's lives, is when they get that character change, that deep down inside person change to where they're a different person now.
So, David, what can our listeners expect from this podcast as a whole?
One of the things that's my passion, I want people to be able to apply what they're hearing to their lives or to everybody's lives, because we're in a time when life is just chaotic, and which of us really even knows how to respond to it? But we'll be going back to the Bible, to the Word of God. We'll be drawing any principles we can, be giving you things to work from, and help you come up with different applications that I believe are going to move towards effective heart change, that are going to make a difference in individuals' lives. And how do you change a nation in chaos? You change a nation in chaos one individual at a time. I think you can look for us to be real, to be transparent, to bring things that you've never heard before that will challenge you, to bring some things simple, to bring some things extremely deep.
David, for folks that might not be familiar with you or aren't in the local area here in McPherson, Kansas, what's the best way for them to learn more about the ministry?
Like just about anything today, check out the web, and I've got it on my logo, livefreeministries.com. That's livefreeministries.com. And you can really go pretty much from there anywhere, whether it's a phone call or get to the videos, get to the materials that we have. But that's the best starting point.
And I do want to let our listeners know we do have a YouTube channel at youtube.com/livefreemin. That's MIN, which is short for ministries. And you can find this video podcast there, as well as the major podcast platforms that we will be posting this to. We definitely appreciate you taking time out of your day to stop by and to listen to what we have to offer. And we hope to see you in the next episode. David, thanks for taking your time and being willing to share.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to it. This has been a passion, so I'm excited to have it underway, and hopefully we'll have many people join together in this effort.
We'll see you in the next one.
Video production, editing, and audio by Matthew. Set design and setup by Ashley. Content recorded live at Studio 104.